The tall building stood like a giant glass monument in the middle of the city, reflecting the lights of the streets below even as the sky turned dark. It was late, past the time when most people had gone home to their families or their TVs. The rush of the day was over. The elevators were quiet, and the thousands of computers were sleeping. Inside this massive structure, the silence fell heavy, like a thick blanket thrown over everything. The man walked slowly down the long hallway on the 34th floor. He was not young anymore. His hair was gray and thin, and his back was a little bent from years of work. He wore a dark blue uniform that had the name of the cleaning company stitched on the pocket. His shoes were soft-soled and made no sound on the carpet. This was his time. When important people in suits left and the noise stopped, he became the master of the building. He pushed his cart carefully. The cart was his partner. It held his trash bags, his sprays, and his cloths. To anyone else, it was just a janitor's cart. To him, it was a toolbox for fixing the mess of the day. He stopped at the first desk. It was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere. Coffee cups were half full, and a chair was pushed out at an odd angle. The man sighed a very soft sigh. He did not judge the person who sat there. He just started to work. He picked up the empty cans and dropped them into the recycling bin on his cart with a gentle clink. He stacked the papers in a neat pile. He took a cloth and sprayed a little cleaner on it. He wiped the desk, moving his hand in circles. He did this not just to clean the dirt, but to bring order to the chaos. He liked things to be right. When he finished, the desk looked inviting, ready for the morning. It was a small act of kindness for someone he had never spoken to. He moved to the next office. This one was almost too clean. The person who worked here was clearly very organized. The only thing out of place was a photograph framed in silver. It showed a young woman and a little girl playing in a park. The man stopped and looked at it for a moment. He smiled gently. He had a granddaughter, too, though she lived far away. He picked up the photo with his rough fingers and wiped the glass where a speck of dust had landed. He placed it back exactly where it was. As he worked, he thought about how different the building felt at night compared to the day. During the day, this place was a machine. People rushed around shouting into phones, worrying about money and looking stressed. They barely looked at him. He was invisible. He was the furniture. He was the man who emptied the trash while they typed on their keyboards. But at night, the building had a soul. It was peaceful. He felt a connection to these empty rooms. He took care of them. And in a way, they took care of him by giving him a purpose. He finished the row of desks and pushed his cart toward the large windows at the end of the hall. The city below was beautiful. Red and white lights moved in streams, like blood cells in veins. He stopped for a minute and just looked. He wasn't sad. He wasn't lonely. He was just there. He felt a sense of calm that he couldn't find anywhere else. But tonight, he felt a pull that was stronger than usual. He had finished his assigned floors. The clipboard on his cart said he was done for the night. He should go to the elevator, go down to the basement, clock out, and catch the bus home. But he didn't move. He stood still in the hallway, listening to the low hum of the air conditioning system. He looked down the corridor toward the executive wing. That was the fancy part of the building. The carpet was thicker there. The desks were made of real wood. He wasn't supposed to clean that area tonight. That was for the weekend crew. But his feet felt itchy. He felt a need to go that way. He looked around to make sure the security guards weren't watching. The cameras were there, high in the corners, their small red lights blinking. He knew they were recording, but he also knew that the guards in the security room rarely watched the feeds closely at this hour. They were usually watching sports or eating dinner. He made a decision. He turned his cart around and headed away from the elevators. He walked deeper into the floor, toward the part of the building where the bosses sat. The air changed as he moved down the hall. It smelled different, more like expensive leather and polished wood, less like fast food and old coffee. He passed a few offices with doors open. He looked inside. The CEO's office was at the very end. It was huge. He stepped inside just for a moment. The room was impressive. There was a massive desk that looked like it could hold up a truck. There were bookshelves filled with books that probably had never been read. There were awards on the walls in gold frames. The man walked to the window. The view was even better here. You could see the whole river. He looked at the desk. It was clean, except for a single folder. He wondered what was in the folder. Bad news? Good news? A plan to fire people? A plan to hire people? He didn't touch it. He just wondered about the life of the person who sat in that chair. He wondered if that person was happy. He wondered if that person had anyone to go home to. He turned to leave the executive suite, but he didn't go back the way he came. His eyes fell on the service elevator at the side of the room. It was the elevator the movers used. It went all the way down to the parking garage and the basement levels. He knew where it went. It went to the lowest level, level B4. That was where the old break room was. It was a room that most people didn't know existed. It used to be for the smoking staff years ago, but now it was just a storage room for old chairs and broken things. And he knew something else was down there. He felt a sudden tug in his chest, a feeling that started in his stomach and went up to his throat. He looked at his watch. It was 8:45 p.m. If he went down there, he would lose 15 minutes. He might miss his regular bus and have to wait for the late one. It was cold outside. He should just go. But his hand moved toward the call button for the service elevator. He pressed it. The door slid open silently. He stepped inside, pushing his cart in with him. He pressed the button for B4. As the elevator descended, the man closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He tried to push away the memories that tried to flood his mind. He tried to think about the cleaning, the trash, the carpet. But the further down he went, the louder the music in his head became. He hadn't played in years. He had promised himself he stopped. It hurt too much to play. It reminded him of things he couldn't have anymore. But tonight, the silence of the building was too loud. He needed to break it. He needed to hear something that wasn't a vacuum cleaner or a phone ring. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. The air in the basement was cool and smelled of concrete and dust. It wasn't fancy like the top floors. It was real. He pulled his cart out into the dim hallway. He knew exactly where to go. He turned the corner and saw the door to the old break room. It was slightly ajar. He pushed the door open. There, in the corner, covered by a heavy gray sheet to keep the dust off, was the shape he had come to see. It was an old upright piano. It had been left behind by a tenant 10 years ago. It was out of tune. Some of the keys stuck. It was not a masterpiece. But to the man in the blue uniform, it was the most beautiful thing in the building. He walked over to it, leaving his cart by the door. He stood in front of the covered shape. He reached out a hand that had scrubbed 1,000 toilets and wiped 1,000 tables. He touched the rough fabric of the sheet. "Okay," he whispered to the empty room. "Just for a minute." He gripped the edge of the sheet and pulled it back. It slid off the piano with a soft whoosh. The dust motes danced in the light of the single bulb overhead. He looked at the black and white keys. They looked back at him like old friends. He sat down on the bench. It creaked under his weight. He placed his fingers on the keys, feeling the cold plastic against his skin. He didn't play a note yet. He just sat there, feeling the vibration of the building around him, preparing to let the music out. The silence in the basement was different from the silence upstairs. Up above, the silence felt heavy because it was full of empty space and expensive furniture. Down here, the silence felt thick because of the concrete walls and the low ceiling. It was a safe kind of quiet. The air was cooler, too, carrying the faint smell of old paper and the metallic scent of pipes that ran along the ceiling. The man sat on a wooden bench, his legs slightly aching from being on his feet for 6 hours straight. He rolled his shoulders, trying to loosen the muscles that had tightened up while he was pushing his heavy cart. He looked at the piano keys in front of him. They were yellow with age, and some of them had small cracks in plastic, but to him, they looked perfect. This instrument had been forgotten by the world, left in the dark to gather dust, much like he sometimes felt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, torn piece of cloth. He used it to wipe down the keys gently, brushing away the layer of gray dust that had settled there since the last time he visited. He did this with great care, treating the dirty instrument like it was a crown jewel. As he wiped each key, he remembered the feel of his old piano, the one he had to sell 20 years ago to pay for the rent when his wife got sick. He remembered the way of those keys, the way they fought back against his fingers just enough to make him feel alive. He placed his hands on the keys now, hovering them for a moment. He took a deep breath and held it. His heart was beating a little faster. It was a strange feeling, a mix of fear and excitement. He felt like a teenager again, getting ready to play at a school recital, worried that he might make a mistake and everyone would laugh. But there was no one here to laugh. There was no one here at all. He let his breath out slowly and pressed down on the middle C. The sound that came out was not perfect. It was a little tinny, and it wobbled slightly as it faded away. The piano was badly out of tune. Some of the strings inside were rusty, and the hammers were worn. But to the man, it was the most beautiful sound he had heard all day. It was a sound that cut through the loneliness of the basement. It was a sound that was real. He started to play a simple scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Up and down. His fingers, which were rough and callous from scrubbing floors and handling harsh cleaning chemicals, moved with surprising delicacy. At first, they felt a little stiff, like rusty hinges on a gate. But as he played the scale a second time, they began to loosen up. The muscle memory took over. His brain stopped telling his fingers what to do, and his fingers just knew. He began to play a melody. It wasn't a famous song you would hear on the radio. It was something he'd made up in his head a long time ago, a tune that had no name. It started low and slow, a deep, rumbling bass line that vibrated through the bench and into his bones. It sounded like a storm coming in from far away, dark and cloudy. As his left hand kept a steady rhythm, his right hand began to dance over the higher keys. The notes were like raindrops, but not the sad kind. They were like the kind of rain that washes the dust off the windows and makes the streetlights shine brighter. He closed his eyes. He didn't need to see the keys. He knew exactly where they were. In his mind, the gray walls of the basement disappeared. He wasn't in a dark room under a skyscraper anymore. He was back in his small apartment 30 years ago. The sun was coming through the window, lighting up the dust motes in the air. His wife was in the kitchen, humming along to the music while she cooked dinner. The smell of onions and garlic filled the room. It was a warm memory, so warm that it made his chest hurt. He played louder now. The music swelled. The notes clashed together sometimes because the piano was out of tune, creating a wavy, eerie sound. But it didn't matter. The emotion behind the notes was strong enough to carry the song. He was pouring all his feelings into the instrument. He put his tiredness into the song, his worry about the bills, his missing of his wife who had passed away, and his love for his granddaughter who lived miles away and didn't call as often as she used to. The song changed. It moved from the dark, rumbling storm into something brighter. The tempo sped up. His fingers flew across the keys, tapping out a rhythm that was hopeful and energetic. It sounded like a heartbeat. It was the sound of survival. It was the sound of someone who works hard every day and keeps going even when they are exhausted. He forgot about his blue uniform. He forgot about the trash bags he had to empty. He forgot about the executives upstairs who didn't know his name. For these few minutes, he wasn't a janitor. He was a musician. He was an artist. He was creating something out of nothing. The feeling was incredible. It was like a weight being lifted off his shoulders. It was like taking a deep breath of fresh air after being in a stuffy room for too long. The music echoed off the concrete walls, filling every corner of the basement. It bounced off the old vending machines and the stacks of broken chairs. It was a lonely sound, but it was also a proud sound. It said, "I am here. I exist. I have something to say." He played a complicated run of notes, his left hand crossing over his right, a trick he had learned when he was young. He smiled a little as he hit the right notes. He felt a spark of joy in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. He didn't hear the soft click of the door handle at the far end of the hallway. He didn't hear the footsteps that were carefully trying to be silent on the concrete floor. He was too lost in the music. He was in a different world. The song was reaching its peak. The melody was jumping around, high and low, full of energy and life. He was playing with passion, his body swaying slightly back and forth with the rhythm. He was pouring his soul into the old, battered piano, giving the forgotten instrument a reason to exist again. He thought about the people upstairs. He thought about how stressed they always looked. He wished he could play for them. He wished he could play this song to tell them that it was going to be okay, that even when things are dark and out of tune, there is still a melody to be found. He wanted to tell them that beauty doesn't have to be perfect or expensive. Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that are broken and left behind. His fingers began to slow down. The energy of the song started to fade, like a wave crashing on the beach and then slipping back into the ocean. He transitioned back into the slow, deep notes he started with. The storm was passing. The clouds were parting. He played the final chord. It was a big, full sound that rang out clearly, despite the dusty strings. He held his hands down on the keys, letting the vibration hum through his fingers and up his arms. He closed his eyes and let the sound hang in the air, not wanting to let it go. For a moment, everything was perfect. There was no cleaning to do, no money problems, no loneliness. There was only the music. Slowly, he lifted his hands off the keys. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. It was a peaceful silence, a satisfied silence. The man opened his eyes and looked at the yellowed keys. He let out a long breath that he felt like he had been holding in for years. He sat there for a minute, just staring at his hands. They were trembling slightly. He flexed his fingers, feeling the stiffness returning now that the music had stopped. He knew he had to get up. He knew he had to grab his cart and clock out and go home. The magic moment was over. Reality was waiting for him. But as he started to stand up, a movement in the doorway caught his eye. He froze. His heart jumped into his throat. He turned his head slowly, expecting to see a security guard ready to scold him for touching company property. But when he saw who was standing there, his blood ran cold. It wasn't a guard. Standing in the shadows of the doorway, listening to the last echoes of the song, was the person from the top floor, the one with the big office, the boss, the man who held the fate of the building in his hands. He was standing perfectly still, his hands in his pockets, staring at the old janitor with a look that the janitor couldn't quite read. The silence suddenly wasn't peaceful anymore. It was terrifying. The man on the bench opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just sat there, exposed. The air in the small, dusty room seemed to freeze the moment their eyes met. The man in the blue uniform felt his stomach drop, a sudden sick feeling that had nothing to do with the late hour or the cold basement. He sat frozen on the piano bench, his hands hovering over the keys like a bird unsure of where to land. He had prepared himself for many things: a security guard, a cocky intern, maybe even a rat, but he had never prepared for this. Standing in the doorway was the person who ran the entire company, the boss, the man whose signature was on the paychecks that allowed the janitor to buy his groceries. Up close, even in the dim light of the single bulb, the boss looked different than he did in the framed photographs in the lobby. He looked smaller. He looked tired. His expensive suit jacket was draped over his arm, and his tie was loosened at the collar. His hair, usually perfectly styled, looked a bit messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it all night. For a long 10 seconds, nobody said a word. The only sound was a quiet hum of the vending machine in the corner and the fading vibration of the piano strings. The janitor's mind was racing with terrible thoughts. He was going to be fired. He was trespassing in a part of the building he wasn't supposed to be in. He was using equipment that didn't belong to him. He opened his mouth to apologize, to make an excuse about just checking the room, but his voice was stuck in his throat. He felt small. He felt like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie jar was a rusty piano, and the punishment might be losing his livelihood. The boss took a step forward. His shoes made a sharp clicking sound on the concrete floor. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he was about to shout. In fact, his face was blank. He walked slowly into the room, his eyes moving from the janitor's face to the yellowed keys of the piano, and then back to the janitor. "I didn't know this was down here," the boss said quietly. His voice was not loud or commanding. It sounded rough, like someone who had been talking or shouting for hours. The janitor finally found his voice. It came out shaky and weak. I'm sorry, sir. I was just leaving. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I finished my rounds and I sat down for a second." He started to stand up, intending to grab his cleaning cart and rush out the door as fast as he could. He wanted to escape this embarrassing moment. He wanted to hide. "Sit," the boss said. It wasn't an order. It was a request. The boss walked over to an old stack of plastic chairs against the wall and pulled one out. He turned it around and sat down, facing the piano. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, looking at the old man with an intensity that made him nervous. "You play that?" the boss asked, nodding his head toward the instrument. "A little," the janitor mumbled, sitting back down slowly but keeping his hands in his lap. "Not very well. It's out of tune. I was just messing around." "It didn't sound like messing around," the boss said. He rubbed his eyes with the palm of his hand. "I was on the 38th floor. I heard it through the ventilation shaft. I thought I was imagining things." The janitor looked at his lap. He picked at a loose thread on his uniform pants. "It's just an old habit, sir. From a long time ago. I shouldn't be here." The boss let out a long sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "I come down here sometimes to get away from the noise up there. The phones ringing, the people demanding things, the numbers that don't add up. I needed to walk. I needed to think." He paused and looked around the dingy room. "I never knew there was music down here." The janitor felt a strange sensation. He was used to being invisible. People looked through him or past him or down at him. They didn't sit down and talk to him about where they walked to think. "It's just a broken piano, sir. It was left here by the last tenant. They were going to throw it out, but it's too heavy to move easily." "It sounds better than the one in my office," the boss said. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I have a grand piano in the lobby. It costs more than most people make in a year. It sits there. It's shiny. It's perfect. But nobody ever plays it. It just sits there like a piece of furniture." He looked up at the janitor. "What you were playing, it wasn't perfect. Some of the notes were off. But it felt real. It felt like you meant it." The janitor looked up, surprised. He saw the dark circles under the boss's eyes. He saw the way the man's shoulders slumped forward. For the first time, the janitor realized that the man in the expensive suit wasn't just a boss. He was just a man who was tired, maybe even lonely. "I was thinking about my wife," the janitor said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "She passed away 3 years ago. She loved music. We couldn't afford a piano. So we used to go to the music store on Sundays just so she could listen to me play the display models." The boss didn't say anything. He just listened. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look at his phone. He just listened. "After she got sick, I sold my guitar to pay for the medicine," the janitor continued, his voice getting a little stronger. "I promised myself I wouldn't play anymore. It hurt too much. But tonight, the building was so quiet. I just needed to hear something beautiful." The boss nodded slowly. "My wife played," he said softly. "She was the one who could actually play. She had lessons. She could make that grand piano sing. I just sit at it and hit keys. It sounds like noise. She died last year. Cancer." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't a scary silence from before. It was a shared silence. Two men from completely different worlds, sitting in a dusty basement, connected by the loss of the women they loved and by the music that reminded them of that loss. The labels of boss and janitor seemed to dissolve in the dim light. There were just two human beings who were hurting. "The song you were playing at the end," the boss said, "the slow part. What was it?" "I don't know," the janitor admitted. "I just made it up. I was thinking about how hard it is to keep going sometimes. But then I thought about how she would want to keep going. So the music got happier. It made me feel less heavy," the boss said. He straightened his back a little, as if the music had physically lifted a weight off his shoulders. "I've been sitting in my office for 4 hours staring at a screen that says we're going to lose everything if I don't make cuts. I was thinking about firing people. I was thinking about the numbers." He shook his head. "Listening to you play, it made me realize that the numbers aren't the only thing that matters. The people matter. The life inside the building matters." He stood up slowly. The janitor flinched, thinking the moment was over, that the boss was going to leave and maybe still report him for being where he shouldn't be. But the boss didn't leave. He walked over to the piano. He reached out and touched the dusty fallboard above the keys. "Can you play that part again?" the boss asked. "The part that felt like hope?" The janitor looked at him, then at the keys. His fingers were stiff again, but his heart was beating a different rhythm now. He wasn't playing for an empty room anymore. He wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for this tired man in the suit who had forgotten what music sounded like. "I can try," the janitor said. He placed his hands back on the keys. He took a deep breath. He didn't play the stormy beginning this time. He went straight to the melody. He played the notes that sounded like a warm sun breaking through clouds. He played it simply, letting the notes ring out into the dusty air. As he played, he watched the boss close his eyes. The man's face relaxed. The lines of stress around his mouth smoothed out. For a few minutes, the problems of company, the debts, the deadlines, and the status differences didn't exist. There was only the sound of an old, out-of-tune piano being played with love in the basement of a skyscraper. The janitor realized that his music wasn't just a secret hobby. It was a gift. And tonight, he had given it to the one person who needed it the most. The last note hung in the air for a long time, fading slowly until it was just a memory in the quiet room. The man in the blue uniform let his hands drop to his lap, his fingers throbbing slightly from the effort. He kept his head down, staring at the chipped ivory keys. Afraid to look up, he felt exposed. He had just poured his heart out in front of the person who held his job in his hands. It was a strange feeling to be so vulnerable, yet feel so light at the same time. For a moment, there was no sound from the boss. The janitor held his breath, waiting for the judgment. Would he say it was nice but unprofessional? Would he tell him to get back to work? The silence stretched out, tight and tense, like a rubber band ready to snap. Then he heard a sound that scared him more than shouting. It was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a quiet sniffle. The janitor dared to lift his eyes. The man in the expensive suit was standing by the piano, but he wasn't looking at the instrument. He had turned away slightly, one hand covering his mouth, his shoulders shaking just a little. The janitor realized with a start that the boss was crying. It wasn't a loud, sobbing cry. It was a silent, trembling cry of a man who has been strong for too long and finally found a crack in the armor. The sight sent a shock through the older man. He had seen the boss in magazines, looking powerful and untouchable. He had seen him on TV screens in the break room, talking about profits and growth. He had never imagined that this man could break. "I'm sorry," the boss choked out, his voice muffled by his hand. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to pull himself back together. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and took a deep, shaky breath. "I apologize. I don't know what came over me." "It's okay, sir," the janitor said softly. He stood up from the bench, feeling the urge to help but not knowing how. Music does that sometimes. It brings things out. The boss turned back to face him. His eyes were red, and his face looked older than it had a few minutes ago, but softer too. "I haven't cried since the funeral. I haven't let myself. There hasn't been time." He laughed, a short, dry sound. "You spend all day telling people what to do, making big decisions, carrying the weight of hundreds of families on your back. You forget that you're just a person. You forget that you can break." He looked at the janitor with a new kind of respect. It wasn't the look you give to someone who cleans your floors. It was the look you give to an equal. You have a gift, not just the playing, but the soul you put into it. I used to play when I was young. I was good at it, technically. I knew all the notes, all the theory. But listening to you just now, I realized I never knew how to make it speak. The janitor felt his face get hot. He wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone like this. "It's just a way to talk when you don't have words, sir. That's all." The boss walked over to the wall and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He looked around the dingy basement. "I come down here to walk the stairs when I can't sleep. I think I walked right past this door 100 times and never looked inside. If I hadn't stopped tonight, if I hadn't heard that sound," he trailed off, "I think I might have made a terrible mistake tomorrow." The janitor looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I was going to sign the papers in the morning," the boss said, his voice dark. "The budget is bad. We have to cut costs. I was looking at the cleaning contract. I was going to outsource it to a different company, a cheaper one. It would have meant letting go of the current crew, people who have been here for years, people I pass in the hall every day and don't even see." The janitor felt a cold chill run down his spine. He looked at his cart, his spray bottles, his uniform. He thought about the other guys on the floor above, the ones with families, the ones who joke about the basketball games. They were all just numbers on a page to the people upstairs. You were going to fire us? The janitor asked quietly. I was going to restructure. The boss corrected himself, but he looked ashamed. That's the word we use. It makes it sound cleaner. But yes, I was going to let you all go to save a few percentage points on a spreadsheet. He pushed himself off the wall and walked back to the piano. He placed his hand on the dusty wood. But hearing you play, it reminded me of my father. He built this company. He used to say that a business isn't the building or the money, it's the people. Somewhere along the way, I stopped believing that. He looked straight into the janitor's eyes. You treated this old, broken piano like it was a treasure. You play with more passion than half the executives I have lunch would play the stock market. If I can fire a man with that much heart just to make the numbers look better for a quarter, then I don't deserve to run this place. The janitor didn't know what to say. He felt a lump forming in his own throat. He realized that the music had done more than just fill the silence. It had saved his livelihood. It had saved the livelihood of his friends. It was a strange, overwhelming thought. Thank you, the janitor whispered. No, the boss said, shaking his head firmly. Thank you. You saved me from myself. I was about to become the kind of man I hate. He stood up straight and buttoned his suit jacket, smoothing out the wrinkles. He looked like a boss again, but a different kind of boss. A human one. You shouldn't be hiding down here, the boss said, looking around the room with a critical eye. This place is a dungeon. This piano deserves better. It's okay, the janitor said quickly. I don't want to be a bother. I just like playing when everyone is gone. The boss smiled. It was a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. We have a lobby on the main floor. It's marble and glass. Very fancy. And we have that grand piano sitting there like a statue. Nobody uses it. It's lonely. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. It was a simple white card with his name and number on it. Nothing fancy. He handed it to the janitor. I want you to come in early tomorrow, the boss said, before the office opens. I want you to play in the lobby. The janitor's eyes went wide. He shook his head frantically. Oh, no, sir. I couldn't. People will see me. I'm just a cleaning guy. They won't want to listen to me. They will listen, the boss said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And you are not just a cleaning guy. You are the musician who reminded me what matters. Besides, he added with a glint of mischief in his eye, I own the building. If I want to hear a concert at 7 a.m., I'm going to have one. He looked at his watch and sighed. I have to go back upstairs. I have some papers to shred. The boss walked to the door, but he stopped one last time before leaving. He looked back at the old man standing by the dusty piano. What's your name? Your real name, I mean. The janitor hesitated. He was so used to being called sir, or hey, or janitor. It's Thomas, he said. Thomas. The boss repeated, as if testing the word out. It's a good name, Thomas. A strong name. I'll see you in the morning, Thomas. Don't be late. The boss walked out into the hallway. His footsteps echoed as he headed toward the elevator, sounding lighter than they had when he came down. Thomas stood alone in the room again. The silence came back, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of possibilities. He looked down at the business card in his hand. It was crisp and clean. He looked at the piano. He looked at his cart full of cleaning supplies. His life felt like it had tilted on its axis. He wasn't just a janitor who had played a song. He was a man who had been heard. He carefully draped the gray cover back over the keys, tucking it in gently. Good night, old friend, he whispered to the piano. He patted the wood one last time. He grabbed the handle of his cart. He felt a spring in his step that hadn't been there for years. He didn't feel the ache in his back or the tiredness in his legs. He felt like he could fly. He pushed the cart out of the room, turning off the light and leaving the door open just a crack. He walked toward the elevator, ready to go home and sleep, ready to wake up and come back. Tomorrow, he wasn't going to the basement. Tomorrow, he was going to the lobby. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of soft pink and orange. The streets below were busy with the early morning traffic, but up on the first floor of the skyscraper, It was peaceful. The lobby was huge, with ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into shadows. The floor was made of shiny white marble that reflected everything like a mirror. In the center of this grand space sat the grand piano. It was a massive instrument, black and glossy, looking more like a piece of modern art than something to make music. Thomas stood in front of it. He felt very small. He was still wearing his blue uniform, but he had taken a few minutes in the restroom to try to smooth out the wrinkles. He had even polished his shoes with a tissue until they didn't look quite so dull. He looked at the piano and then at the empty elevators. His hands were shaking. He had never played on an instrument this expensive. He was afraid his rough fingers might scratch the keys, or that he wouldn't be good enough for such a beautiful room. The building was mostly quiet, but he knew that wouldn't last. In 20 minutes, the flood of employees would begin. The people in suits, the ones with the coffee cups and the briefcases, would come pouring in. They usually rushed past the front desk with their heads down, checking their phones, already stressed about the day ahead. Thomas wondered what they would do when they saw him. He was afraid they would laugh. He was afraid they would tell him to get away from the piano. He took a deep breath and sat on the bench. It was leather and very soft. He flexed his fingers. They felt stiff this morning. He closed his eyes for a moment and pictured the dusty basement. He pictured the wife he missed so much. He remembered the feeling of the song he played last night. He needed that feeling now. He needed to play not for show, but for love. He placed his hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth, nothing like the chipped plastic of the old piano downstairs. He pressed down a chord. The sound was incredible. It was rich and full, echoing through the massive lobby like a thunderclap, but a beautiful one. The notes hung in the air much longer than he expected. He smiled. This piano was alive. He started to play. He didn't start with a complicated classical piece. He started with the same melody he had played in the basement. It was a song that felt like morning. It started slow and gentle, waking up the room. The music flowed out of him, easier this time. The expensive piano seemed to know what he wanted to do. It sang for him. He played for about 5 minutes, lost in the world of the music. He didn't notice the security guard at the front desk look up with surprise. He didn't notice the early bird receptionist stop what she was doing to listen. Then the elevator bell dinged. The door slid open. The first wave of employees had arrived. Thomas heard the chatter. He heard the clicking of high heels on the marble. His heart hammered against his ribs. He almost stopped. He almost got up and ran. But he remembered the boss's words. Asterisk, I own the building. If I want to hear a concert, I'm going to have one. Asterisk, he kept playing. A young woman in a gray suit walked out. She was typing furiously on her phone. She took 3 steps and then froze. She looked up, her eyes wide. She stopped walking. She just stood there, listening. More people came out of the elevators. One by one, they stopped. The chattering died down. The clicking of heels stopped. The lobby, usually a place of rushed noise and indifference, fell silent except for the music. Thomas kept his eyes closed. He couldn't look at them. He just played. He poured the warmth of the sunrise into the music. He played the hope of a new day. He played the dignity of every person in the room, whether they were the boss or the janitor. The music swelled, filling the huge space, bouncing off the glass walls and the marble floors. It sounded like a symphony. The crowd grew. There were now 50 people standing in the lobby. Nobody was looking at their phones. Nobody was rushing to their desks. They were just standing there, some with their mouths slightly open, others with their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. For the first time in years, the building didn't feel like a factory of stress. It felt like a sanctuary. High above on the mezzanine level, the boss stepped out of his office. He had been watching for a few minutes. He saw the employees gathered below. He saw the way their shoulders had dropped, the tension leaving their bodies before the day had even started. He saw Thomas, sitting at the grand piano in his blue uniform, looking like a king. The boss walked down the curved staircase to the main floor. He didn't say anything to disturb the moment. He just walked to the edge of the crowd and listened. He saw the CFO, the man who was always worried about the budget, standing with a peaceful look on his face. He saw the young intern, usually nervous and fidgety, standing perfectly still with a smile. The music was doing what no meeting could ever do. It was bringing them together. Thomas finally brought the song to an end. He played the final chord, a rich, deep sound that seemed to vibrate in everyone's chest. He lifted his hands off the keys. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of awe. For a second, nobody moved. Then, the boss started to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. One by one, the other employees joined in. The applause started quiet and then grew louder and louder until it filled a massive lobby. It wasn't polite applause. It was real, enthusiastic appreciation. They were clapping for the music, but they were also clapping for the feeling the music had given them. Thomas opened his eyes. He saw the crowd. He saw their smiling faces. He saw the boss standing at the front, clapping the hardest. The old janitor turned red in the face. He stood up and gave a small, awkward bow. He couldn't believe it. The boss walked up to the piano. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd. They went silent. "I want you all to meet Thomas," the boss said, his voice booming slightly in the lobby. "Many of you have passed him in the halls for years. Some of you may not have known his name. Thomas has been taking care of this building for 15 years. And last night, you reminded me what this building is actually for." The boss turned to look at Thomas. "Thomas, I told you last night that we almost lost our way. We almost forgot about the people. You brought the music back. I don't want it to stop." He looked back at the employees. "Effective immediately. The cleaning contracts are not being canceled. We are keeping the family we have. And Thomas," the boss paused and smiled, "I've decided that this piano is too lonely during the day. From now on, every morning from 7:30 to 8 o'clock, the lobby is closed of phones and meetings. We're going to have live music. And Thomas has agreed to be our first artist." The crowd cheered. It was a genuine cheer, filled with relief and joy. The young woman in the gray suit wiped a tear from her eye. A man in a delivery uniform stopped at the edge of the crowd and clapped too. Thomas looked at the boss, stunned. "You want me to play? Here? Every day?" "I want you to play," the boss said. "And I want you to teach me how to play like that. Someday, when I'm not so busy." "I'd like that, sir," Thomas said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. The boss reached out and shook Thomas's hand. It was a firm handshake, a grip of equality. "Well, Thomas," the boss said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I think you're done with the mop for today. I think you have a concert to finish." The boss stepped back, and Thomas sat back down at the grand piano. He looked out at the sea of faces. He didn't see suits or titles anymore. He just saw people. He saw his neighbors. He thought about his wife up in heaven, listening. He hoped she was proud. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play again. This time, it was an upbeat, jazzy tune that made people want to tap their feet. The mood in the lobby was light and happy. People started to move again, but they were moving differently. They were smiling at each other. They were holding doors open for one another. The sun had fully risen now, streaming through the glass walls and lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air around the piano. The building was no longer just a machine for making money. It was a place where a janitor could play a song that made a CEO cry and brought a whole building together. And as the music filled the morning air, everyone knew that this was going to be a very good day.